Welcome to our first There's More event of the semester. My name is Amulya and I'm a student producer here as well as a junior at USD. We want to begin by recognizing that USD is on the land of the Kumeyaay Nation. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the USD community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony, and we find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. There's More is a live storytelling initiative put on by the Humanity Center and Changemaker Hub. Our goals with these stories is to bring out raw, meaningful experiences of the human condition. The stories come in many different forms, such as more human, more insight, more change, and more dialogue. Every month, myself and my fellow student producer, Lily Yates, put on this live event focusing on different and relevant themes and ideas, although this is our first time doing it virtually. We then take recordings of the event, produce them, and put them onto our There's More podcast. Quick plug, you can find us on YouTube or iTunes at There's More and at there'smore.sandiego.edu. I want to thank our faculty producer and advisor, Diane Keeling, who has been such a strong guiding force in the execution of tonight's event. I also want to thank our sponsors, Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Lindy Villa with the Humanity Center, and Mike Williams and Juan Rivas with the Changemaker Hub. Our theme for this month is apart, which can be interpreted as apart as in separate, or apart as in a part of the whole. With everything going on, we felt that this theme was an appropriate way to encapsulate the unique feeling of being so apart from friends and family, but still a part of this greater global collective going through this together. First off, we have the Director of Health Promotion from the Center for Health and Wellness, who has acquired a ridiculous amount of houseplants since March that have brought her so much joy and peace while at home. Presenting her speech, A Little Bit Like Me, please welcome Stephanie Lynch.
Last holiday season, my big Cyber Monday score was a seriously good deal on the 23andMe DNA test kit. I purchased one for my partner and one for myself, mostly for the health insights, but also out of intrigue for what the test might reveal about my ancestry. After gifting the kit at Christmas and then letting the boxes collect dust on our counter for a few weeks, my partner and I finally spit into the tiny little cylinders and received our results via email in February. I was excited to see what I might learn about myself and my family. In the quiet calm of a late Tuesday evening, I scrolled to the email I had received earlier in the day and opened my results. I looked through the health section first with no surprises or noteworthy findings. I didn't even have the gene that made cilantro taste like soap. Very disappointing. So I tabbed over to the DNA relatives section to see if I was, related to Kevin Bacon or something. All I remember in the moment that followed was the feeling of my heart stopping in a way I had never felt before. There, in no uncertain terms, were two words that I had never seen in connection to myself before: half-brother. Below was the photo of a man who was so the spitting image of my dad at a younger age that I almost thought it was a joke and that my dad had maybe taken a test. I started shaking. My dad had most certainly not taken a test, and this man's DNA matched the criterion of a half-sibling to a T. 1,000 questions instantly plagued me. How could it be that an only child from what I believed was the most ordinary of ordinary families could have a half-brother? Knowing that my alleged half-brother would have received a notification of my existence that evening as well, and that my father was likely sleeping and not in a place to receive such a strange call at 10:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night, I did what any good millennial would do in need of instant information. I sent him a message. Wow, we seem to share a lot of DNA. I know, sheer brilliance for a first message to a sibling that I just learned existed. Luckily for this millennial, he responded just moments later. A little bit in shock right now. Hello. A frenzy of messages followed, and I learned that my half-brother had been adopted at birth well before my parents met, and that I was the first genetic relative he had been connected to. His existence was a true and honest surprise to my dad and brought quite a bit of happy shock to my entire family. In the days that followed, we did what any typical new genetic siblings would do. We asked each other very important and intelligent questions like, do you have the loudest sneeze ever? Because I definitely do. And what's your favorite donut? Because mine is glazed, and that is very important information about me. And of course, is your second toe longer than your toe? We became friends, and out of this entirely unexpected place, I found answers to one of the top questions I remember sitting with as an only child. If I had had a sibling, what would they have been like? I never really begrudged being an only child, but I do remember pondering this one question. In the months leading up to this discovery, my two daughters had been obsessed with the movie Frozen 2, which I'm sure any parent can relate to. And by constant request, I had had to keep that playlist on repeat. In the movie's hit song, Into the Unknown, the lead character, Elsa, trying to determine what force or being is beckoning her out onto a grand journey, sings the line, "Are you someone out there who's a little bit like me?" Every time I would hear that line after this discovery, it would resonate with me on such a deep level. Someone out there who's a little bit like me. My brother lives in Oregon, and I, of course, in San Diego. Not wanting to seem like an overly excited new little sister with nothing better to do, I gave it a full 9 days before broaching the topic of trying to meet in person by adding a leg on to an upcoming trip. He, of course, was very receptive to this idea, and the flight was booked quickly. I had grand visions in my head of what that first meeting would be like and just how surreal it would be to meet my brother, a relative I had no clue existed just days prior. But COVID-19 had other plans. Just about 2 weeks after booking my flight, we watched the whole world close down. As we're also intimately familiar now, we watched schools, businesses, workplaces, and restaurants all shutter their doors as we all teamed together to stop the virus from spreading. Big, sloppy tears formed in my eyes as I canceled my April trip and later a trip we had set for May. I grieved alongside so many others facing big life moment postponements and disappointments. While the world stayed home and learned to cook and binge watched a documentary about an outspoken tiger keeper and zoomed into a life we knew before, my brother and I resolved ourselves to the reality that we weren't going to get to meet anytime too soon and that we would have to continue to get to know each other from 1,000 miles apart. So we FaceTimed, we competed to send the best quarantine memes, and we continued a back and forth of a million questions about our childhoods, our likes and dislikes, our families, and so much more. We even played a few games of Battleship over Zoom after I figured out that I could ship him his own set. Like everyone else in the year 2020, we adapted. When all I wanted to do was sit across from him at a restaurant table and observe his mannerisms to compare them to my own, we adapted. While I knew that video chats and virtual games paled in comparison to actually meeting, we adapted. Through the disappointment of a number of postponed trips, we adapted. Eventually, as counties began to reopen and our healthcare heroes began to slightly know the virus better, a road trip seemed within low calculated risk, so long as we all limited our own potential exposure to the virus beforehand. So he made the drive out, and we finally did meet over the summer, my whole family and my new brother. I finally got to quietly observe mannerisms matching my own and my dad's, and to be able to be in the presence of someone who was indeed a little bit like me. While nothing did compare to meeting in real life, I've become exceedingly thankful for the joy of getting to know my brother while separated by the COVID-19 shutdown. In the most challenging and peculiar of times, the timing of this discovery gave me something fun and new to look forward to each day that we got to know each other better. It is not lost on me that I'm somehow standing on this end of the peak, hopefully, of a global pandemic. Bonus, a family member, and for that.
Next, we have Michael Lomas, a graduate student at USD's Franciscan School of Theology, pursuing his master's in Divinity. Michael can actually pick up any instrument from the symphony and play it, not very well, he admits, except for string instruments, but he would know the mechanics of the instrument anyway. Presenting his story following the footprints in the sand, Michael Lomas.
I come from a very large, tight-knit Latino family. My parents are both the youngest of 9 siblings, and so growing up, family was everything to us. Aside from my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and even sometimes my older cousins were my caretakers. My younger cousins and their kids, or my older cousins' kids, were my first friends, and everything in my life revolved around the idea of home and the family. As a kid, our family vacations were going to spend the weekend at Aunt so-and-so's house, or even maybe spend a few weeks at my grandparents' house in the valley. My sister is not only my best friend, but my sounding board, my inspiration. She's my pillar of strength, and I consider her my soulmate. My family was the church choir, and going to church every Sunday, or every Saturday night rather, was like going to a big family reunion. So whether we were worshiping, celebrating a birthday, fighting, or grieving, we did it together. My second family I found in my group of friends. There are about 16 of us to this day and some of them I've known for over 20 years. We still gather and talk on a regular basis. And when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I became really involved with my local parish community. And through that community of worship, I found my third family. So you might be asking, what does all of this have to do with Apart? Well, all three of those family systems that I just mentioned are in San Jose, California. In 2016, I applied and entered the Franciscan Order, a religious fraternity of men who, though imperfect and flawed, try to live the gospel values of hope, charity, and love. Yet in order to become a part of this new family, I had to say goodbye to my other three. You see, the Franciscan order is a mendicant order, meaning we are not called to live or minister in one designated area, but to travel to the edges of society and accompany the poor and marginalized, the broken and the forgotten, our brothers and sisters whom I and who society have overlooked for one reason or another. I could feel the calling to enter religious life, but the decision to join the order was not easy. I had to make the difficult decision to leave my family, my friends, my people, and begin a journey that is very countercultural, contentious, and even discouraged from. I remember when I received my acceptance letter from the friars, I started to doubt my decision. I spoke with my spiritual director at the time and asked if it would be okay to delay or defer my acceptance for a year or so. And he questioned me. He said, "Are you wanting to delay because you actually have something that you need to finish? Or do you want the year so you can come up with excuses not to join?" He got me. I wasn't acknowledging my own fear. And once I was able to name them, they lost their power over me. 2 months later, I began my journey as a friar. Joining the order, leaving my comfort zone, stepping into the unknown and putting my faith in God is one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it's also been one of the most rewarding. Don't get me wrong, religious life is hard, and there are moments where I question my sanity. But at the end of the day, sharing a meal, a story, or just that knowing look with someone, letting them know that they are seen, is just a sweet reminder that lets me know that I'm where I need to be. Many people look at my life and at the three vows I have professed, the vows of poverty, of chastity, and obedience, as restrictive or as a sacrifice. But for me, I see them as something that frees me. A Dominican priest, Timothy Radcliffe, once said, "God's love is twofold. It is both universal and particular." And the marriage vows are an expression of God's particular love, whereas the religious vows are an expression of God's universal love. When understood in that light, I realized I have not left my family behind, but rather, like the shepherd who seeks out the one who has strayed from the 99, I am free to enter the world and embrace everyone as my brother or sister, my mother or my father. As a kid, I remember my mom always having a picture or some decoration with the poem Footprints in the Sand. In the story, the person is dreaming of a set of footprints appearing in the sand as moments of their life flash across the sky. However, the individual notices that when there are difficult times, there is only one set of footprints, and they angrily confront God, saying, Why did you abandon me when I needed you most? And God replies, my child, when you saw only one set of footprints in the sand, it was then that I carried you. This pandemic has been such a difficult and uncertain time. Our global and our local families are grieving and crying out for help. Many feel lost or alone, isolated or struggling with anxiety. For them, there is only one set of footprints in the sand right now. The question is, where do I stand? Do I need to be carried, or am I willing to carry someone else? Either is okay, but I need to be able to honestly speak to those feelings, as we all do. My journey as a Franciscan friar has taught me that, although we are separate and apart, we have to consider how we are still a part or a member of our local and global families. Thank you.
And last but definitely not least, we have a woman who is a certified snowboarding instructor in high school and college, but don't ask her to do anything fancy because she's been on a board exactly once in the past 15 years. From the Department of Communication Studies, presenting her story Wigs, we have lecturer in Communication Studies, Haley Swartz.
We sat on the red chairs, the new ones. At least they were new to me. I hadn't been home for 2 months. That afternoon, I took the 4.5-hour journey south amidst the rolling hills of gilded trees, a quick escape during the fall of my senior year of college. It would have been a perfect autumn day, despite the cloudy sky chasing me from upstate New York to central Pennsylvania. Now home, away from the chaos of college life and prepared for a relaxing weekend filled with catch-up reading, my mom and I curled up in those red chairs, rocking by the fire. I think you should get a long blonde one this time, something really fun, I said, paging through a catalog we got in the mail that day. I held open a page, pointing to my personal selection. See, look at this one, isn't it fun? Or maybe this red one, but definitely long, not short. I've never seen you with long hair before. My mom turned and looked at me, her features washed out without makeup, her eyes small, already missing the embellishment of eyebrows and eyelashes. She ran her fingers through her hair, really just a crop of strands sparingly dispersed over her scalp. I'm not going to get a wig this time, she retorted. She didn't like the way they itched against her bare skin or how hot they made her head. You think my hair looks that bad? I didn't answer. That question had popped into our conversations frequently over the past few years. After losing her hair the first time, she could never seem to get it right. When her hair finally returned, she cut it close to her head as if afraid to lose it again. Then she let it grow, sculpting it into a helmet every morning so no stray hair would fall into her face. She straightened her waves, experimented with perms, put it back with pins, pinned it up with curlers. She called in my young and modern expertise, but never liked what I did with it. I had never really thought about how transformative it would be to lose my hair. It's such an intimate part of our sense of self, and it can be the ultimate accessory. It can be manipulated to fit any mood, dressed up, dressed down, neglected, overdone, colored, left alone. My mom had battled with her hair all her life. It was naturally curly in the 60s and 70s when hair needed to be ironed straight, and it wasn't curly enough in the 80s when hair needed to be large, puffed up, and over the top. And in the 90s, she settled on this constant short perm until it shed clump by clump. Hair is a part of womanhood, and after losing both her breasts and her uterus, my mom's hair was the only evidence left of her femininity. Even the wigs, when she wore them, were never quite right. There was the short, flippy one, a quintessential mom cut, the curly one that never laid right, and the one that looked fine, but the color, it was just off. The wigs were never a part of her. They never defined her. They simply concealed her disease. Maybe it was fitting she was losing it again, even though the doctor said that this time she wouldn't. This was the enduring narrative of her experience with cancer. It seemed as though nothing the doctors said was ever true. Her double mastectomy was the first answer. Cancer grew into the scar tissue. Then it was radiation to sap the growth, but they missed the spread. It was one round of chemo, then another plus radiation, then more surgery, then more drugs, a merry-go-round of invasive treatments with side effects that became increasingly unbearable. I think you'll want a wig, I urged. You know, winter's coming up. Your head will be cold. I could hear her inhale and then let out a soft sigh, just loud enough for me to notice. Then I will wear a hat. Folding the catalog, I slipped it somewhere in between the towering pile underneath the lamp table. I sat back in the overstuffed red chair, crossed my legs as I tried to find my place in Jane Eyre. Jane had escaped from her Rochester and was wandering through fields, aimlessly drifting towards a faint light. My mom started rifling through the piles of catalogs and magazines. I guess I can at least look at them, she said. But if I get one, I want a nice one that doesn't look like a wig or feel like one either. In the end, she never wore another wig. Through her last few months, her head accessory of choice was this warm and fuzzy fleece cap, like the adult version of hats made for newborns. It was a shield from plummeting temperatures and a mechanism to control fragile body temperatures. Most of the time she slept. She couldn't sleep at night. It was a short in her circadian rhythm, perhaps the result of anxiety that comes with the awareness of mortality. So she spent her nights shrouded in the comfort of her cap, curled up in her red chair. Those red chairs are no longer a pair. My brother uses one to walk his newborn baby girl to sleep, and I lean against his twin at my dad's house, peeking over his shoulder as he pages through old photos, smiling at memories of my mom without her wigs. Thank you.
I want to open this room up now for some discussion. If anyone has any questions or insights.
First, I just want to say thank you to our storytellers today. These were beautiful and touching stories. They always are, but I mean, some of these really spoke to me personally, just from experiences of family members with cancer, or, you know, being a part of a Catholic church, but not knowing what exactly goes into, you know, the mission of someone who is joining an order. I wanted to just, this is more a comment than a question, but just to mention to Stephanie that your story really resonated with me, because my sister-in-law had a very similar experience. She found out she had a half sister, but she didn't know about until she did 23andMe. But it wasn't, the family didn't receive the news the same. And even though she has tried to develop a relationship with her half sister doesn't necessarily want that relationship because she feels like she didn't have a relationship with her father growing up, but my sister-in-law did get that relationship. So there's that tension there she's working through. So I just think it's a blessing that you're able to have that relationship and that the entire family is embracing it. So that's wonderful.
There's so many different experiences that exist, and I'm so sensitive to that, while being so grateful for the experience that we've had. So
I thought all were very beautifully constructed, clear beginning, middle, end, and they all had a lovely arc to them. So it's obvious that all of you put time into thinking how you wanted your story to be told and how you wanted it to be received. And I'm in the English department, and I'm very fond of and knowledgeable about, I guess, an 18th century writer named Dr. Samuel Johnson. And he was famous not only for his own biographies that he authored, but for a biography that was written about him that became sort of the prototype for a modern biography. And he talked about the importance of biographies of the everyday person, and that you can learn as much from the story of an ordinary person as you can from the story of a great king. And I thought that all of you picked these kind of very relatable turning points that, as Diane relates, hook into all of us, not in the same terms, but just in terms of turning points in our own life that often come upon us either as a surprise, as they did with Stephanie, or as a kind of painful, deliberative process, as with Michael, or through Haley's own journey with her mother, which came down to the tender care of trying to help her make it to the end of her life with dignity and ease. I shared the same journey with my own father, who died of lung cancer. And, the last 6 months of his life were very much about how can we make this into a good day? So anyway, thank you. Great job. And I really enjoyed them.
So, Michael, I just had a quick question for you, just because I don't know much at all about, your order. We're in choir together, so I know that you're involved, but is your order based in San Diego, and was that sort of the only, I guess it was implied that was sort of the only choice that you could make to join, or were you looking into other orders, or how does that sort of work?
My order is not based in San Diego. We are a worldwide order, and we have what they call a curia in Rome, which is where every 3 years we get a new provincial minister, or not provincial, a general minister, and he kind of oversees the entire order worldwide. So I belong to the province of St. Barbara, and so my mother house would be in Oakland, California, actually, and that's where I first met the friars. But my province is the entire West Coast, so it's Oregon, Washington, California, and Arizona. And when I first looked into religious life, I was looking for more local communities. There's a group of Discalced Carmelites in my hometown. Jesuits were a good choice, and even in my own diocese as a diocesan priest. But eventually, I was always told you'll know the right place, because when you come into that home or into that house, it'll feel like you've come home. And so I was looking around at a bunch of different orders, and when I met the friars, I just knew it was home for me. And so that's how I decided the friars, the Franciscans, that is, because there's more than Franciscan friars. And yeah, there are other groups, but this is where I felt called.
This is also not a question, it's more like a comment of what came up for me as I was listening to the stories. One, I think Cynthia just put it in such beautiful words of some of what I was experiencing in this idea of the craft that you put in what seems like a short story, and the work that goes behind that, I'm sure, is plenty, and how the delivery makes it sound still like it was just written in an afternoon with like a little bit of tea on the side, and just like this is my story, So you all made it flow in a way that it was like we were sitting there next to you, like actually having that conversation or hearing you tell it in my head outside in some balcony or something. So I appreciate I know the work that probably goes behind this is big, and at the same time it's inspiring enough to the point of Cynthia of like the biographies of ordinary people. It's inspiring to just be like, well, why haven't I told this one other story that like you made me think of? What would it take for me to just sit down and just like write it up? It will not be as beautiful as this in the first try, I'm sure, but just what will it look like? And the practice of that, I think, is something lost often. And then the last thing that I'll say that also made me think of with Stephanie's story, during this pandemic times, I feel like so many things happen and nothing happens at the same time if you're not paying attention. And your story kind of just reminded me of how all of our lives are having all these really important moments that are taking place that if we don't pay attention to, we're gonna miss out just because I keep waiting for this to be over, right? When what we have is this is what we have, and this is where we can be, and we can pay attention to what is happening right now. Not all of the situations are gonna be as like maybe story worthy as what yours is, Stephanie, but in many ways, it's just a matter of actually paying attention to what is happening in our lives. So I appreciated the reminder of that.
Either, but I think all the speeches were really touching and had their own message that was really impactful. And Professor Swartz, I think you did set up like a perfect example for what our show and tell speeches should be. And hearing you talk about your experience reminded me of when I was growing up. I saw my mom help her mom, and it was really touching, and I really appreciated you sharing it and listening.
all three of these were just so well done, so touching. What a great experience for us to, and how courageous each of you have been. Haley, I was wondering how you share the memories of your mom with your own children and create a relationship with a grandma that they never got to know.
That's a great question. We talk about her a lot, so they know about Grandma Carrie. We have pictures of her, but it's interesting you asked that too, because I don't talk about it that much. And this is actually the first time I've shared about her in a public setting. I wrote the bones of this, when I was a senior in college after she died. So I have circled back to it a few times, and it's part of a bunch of little things that I've dabbled in over the past almost 15 years. But yeah, so I probably should do more, Dr. Pace. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, you ought to do more. You ought to send it to the Atlantic.
Okay. And Stephanie, I really liked how you tied everything into the current situation. And one of the things that I talk about with my public speaking students is using concrete language. And you talked about the things that we are all experiencing right now in such concrete terms, talking about baking bread and watching Netflix and that thing about tigers. So that was a great way to put images in our head and relate everything with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers and everyone who attended the event. It was honestly a great pleasure and honor to hear all of your individual stories. So once again, thank you guys all for attending.